Hello everyone, welcome back to the show. My name's Dan, this Exploder, and I'm here with another episode just for you. Finally, I'm able to record an episode. I know it's been a while, it's probably been a little over a month. I'm trying to do it every other week, but you know, real life gets in the way. Thank you for the people that have came back to listen to the episode, and I hope you enjoy what I'm about to present. One thing about this podcast is I try to cover all different aspects of professional wrestling, from different kinds of storylines to good things that have happened to a lot of bad things that have happened, because like I've said, the good stuff isn't funny, to different types of gimmicks and different types of wrestling schools and on. One school in particular I talked about in a previous episode, Powerhouse, check that out, find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, yada yada yada, all that stuff, wherever you follow it. I talked about the WCW Power Plant and the nature of the training camp and the kind of stars it produced, the couple that it did, and the nature of training in general. Now, I also want to talk about sort of the flip side of that coin. So in this episode, instead of talking about the WCW side of things with the power plant, I want to talk about the WWF developmental system and its changes throughout time. Now, WCW always sort of had one system. They had the WCW power plant. They worked with companies like independent promotions here and there, but for the most part, WCW's developmental guys, if you want to call it that, would go through the power plant. But WWF's history of their developmental program has been varied and wide and different. So in this episode, I want to cover the different types of developmental promotions, how this has changed over time, and the different players involved. First, we'll start out with the obvious ones. I'm going to talk about developmental programs. These are promotions that the WWF or WWE, depending on the year, personally worked with and helped to develop stars that either A, they had just signed and sent there to work on stuff, people they were looking at signing to a bigger deal and were there to work in front of a live crowd, and so on and so forth. Now, I've talked about the USWA being sort of a feeder system, and the dying days of USWA, which I've covered in both a podcast and an episode of the podcast, if you can find that. I've talked about how the USWA in its final days was a place for that, where a talent, if they were trying to get something down or working on a new gimmick, famously Glenn Jacobs went to USWA to work on wearing a mask while wrestling. He would become Doomsday and then later become Kane, and the relationship that the WWF had with ECW. Now, the reason I don't count these in the developmental system is because, well, ECW would use talents like Droz or Brockus or Doug Furnas and Phil LaFon or Al Snow, etc., who were under WWF contract, but were working in ECW to develop a character or get some ring work. But they weren't necessarily developmental programs, as you'll see. There's a distinct difference, and that's why I don't count them. And the same with USWA. They may have had certain people working with them, but these weren't full developmental programs as they had become to known. So that's where I want to talk about the differences. That's a very subtle difference, but it's a very important one. The first one that really comes to mind is one that, quite frankly, didn't do a whole lot in the short term, but you could argue long term did very well. Ultimate Pro Wrestling, based in California by a man named Rick Bassman, who was responsible for getting the Ultimate Warrior into wrestling, and despite that, they still trusted him to find new talent. Now, this is a promotion where, quite frankly, it was sort of the beginning of the developmental process. It wasn't, you'll see later on in the process, later on in developmental, you're going to see some guys, promotions that are going to produce a lot of very talented people who are going to go directly to the roster and do pretty well. UPW was a little different in that there were guys who came through there, but it wasn't necessarily a direct feeder system like you'll find later with other promotions. Guys like Brian Kendrick, Frankie Kazarian, Christopher Daniels, Nathan Jones, a very young and skinny Samoa Joe, a robotic John Cena, all appeared in UPW, but many of the guys I just mentioned wouldn't go to the WWF directly. They would go through the independents, places like Ring of Honor, eventually TNA, and for a guy like Samoa Joe, and even Frankie Kazarian would eventually end up in the WWE, but not directly from their time in UPW. John Cena would go through another promotion, another part of developmental, which I will certainly get to. A couple of the notable UPW alumni to then almost directly get a cup of coffee with the WWE would be Aaron Aguilera, who would play Carlito's stab-happy bodyguard Jesus, and Sylvester Terkay, who would get a couple months in the WWE on the ECW brand. So yeah, two very big successes. They originally worked in 1998, and then in 2006, they announced that they were once again working with WWE as talent scouts, but the promotion itself, the UPW, would then fold in 2007, so that's not really a great track record. Another promotion coming out of the Memphis area. After the fall of USWA, there was a lot of attempts by promotions to sort of fill this USWA role, especially in an official capacity. The first official WWF territory for developmental was Power Pro Wrestling. This would go from 1998 to 1999, and it was founded by Randy Hales. Now, this would produce a couple of decent guys, most notably Kurt Angle and Matt Bloom, aka Albert. But it would only last for a year for the developmental deal after a particular promo by Doug Gilbert, who, live on air, said that Jerry Lawler raped a 13-year-old and that owner Randy Hales was upstairs smoking crack.
Randy Hales is upstairs with his hand on that little button that could cut me off. See, Randy, if I start saying something again that I shouldn't about you running down the road smoking crack.
That's not true. That's not true.
Oh, yeah, Dave. It is true, and Randy Hales has confessed.
Well, now let me tell you what we can do. You have a point. You have a point.
Okay, well,
there are certain things we can control. There are certain times we can cut the microphones and go to commercial. And I think now is one of those times.
Hold it, Dave. Let me say one more thing. You give everybody else their chance, right?
Watch what you say.
I'll watch what I say now. Now, listen, the first thing... Now, right, hold on one second. Listen, the first thing... Somebody showed me a tape broadcast to come out here and went, I'm Doug Gilbert, and Jerry Lawler, I'm going to stick my fist in your mouth. Well, come on, Dave, I ain't that corny. I just said, you know I'm Doug Gilbert, and Jerry Lawler, you raped a little 13-year-old girl.
Now, come on. This is...
The WWF relationship didn't last after that. Go figure. Then, of course, there was the IWA Puerto Rico, which was run by Victor Quinones. This was they were a developmental territory, I guess, in name. It was going to function different. They would send talent there from time to time. This was a fully functional promotion, and IWA would actually last for quite a while without the WWF. But for a while there, the WWF would be interested. They'd send people there for between 1999 and 2001. And, not their primary developmental, but it was something that's enough to get at least a mention in this episode. Now we start talking about the big hitters. Ohio Valley Wrestling, which started being a developmental territory in 1999. Now the promotion was started by Danny Davis in 1993 as an NWA affiliate. And in 1999, Jim Cornette would buy part ownership. He'd become the booker, and then he would go to WWF and pitch a promotion as an all-in-one training school and promotion for up-and-coming prospects to get experience, not only training, but working in front of a live crowd. I mean, this sounds very familiar, and I'll get to it, but this was in 1999 where he came with it. According to Jim Cornette, this was A, because he owned part of the company, and B, he was tired of living in Connecticut, and C, he wanted to get away from Vince Russo because, well, who doesn't? And this would be the beginning of the WWF Ohio Valley Wrestling working relationship as a developmental territory. Now, despite what some may believe, while the WWE did supply developmental talent for OVW to use, the WWF, WWE, whatever, did not own OVW. OVW was a completely independent wrestling promotion who simply worked on a licensing deal, who worked with the WWF and would accommodate the talent that the WWF would send to get further seasoning. The WWF would take advantage of this arrangement and start sending their developmental talent to OVW. The first of all of them would be former American Gladiator champion and future everything else, Rico Constantino. Jim Cornette would be the booker, on-screen authority figure, and WWF liaison until July 10th, 2005, after he bitch-slapped himself out of a job. The story, as you obviously know by now because you're a wrestling fan, is that a young Anthony Corelli was attending an OVW TV taping with his daughter and was shown on camera laughing at the boogeyman, as you tend to do. This was all it took for Jim Cornette, a man who admitted to trying to run someone over in real life. He snapped and smacked the future Santino Marella, which would cause the WWE to fire him from his WWE side of the contract, with his creative duties being given to Paul Heyman, who was only there until the ECW relaunch, and then he was gone. Numerous former talent and bookers, including at one point former AWA booker Greg Gagne, would take over before everything was officially handed over to Al Snow. Despite not working for the WWF anymore, despite not being that that guy in charge of the developmental. Cornette was still part owner of OVW, and he would hold it for another 2 years before selling his shares back to Danny Davis. So that's a very unique situation where he didn't work for the WWF anymore, but he was still a part owner of OVW, even though he had nothing to do with promotion, which is very unique. OVW was the primary developmental territory during this time, meaning there were a lot of future main roster performers, such as the famed OVW4. That would be Dave Bautista, Brock Lesnar, John Cena, and Randy Orton. 4 future world champions, 4 major stars, all came out of OVW. But there was also other talent, such as Aaron Stevens, who would later become Damian Sandow, Beth Phoenix, Bobby Lashley, the Boogeyman, of course, Charlie Haas, CM Punk, Cody Rhodes, Elijah Burke, Deuce and Domino, not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, Doug Basham, and the Damaja, who would later become Danny Basham, when they got called up to do some kind of dominatrix gimmick thing. It was weird. Nick Eugene Dinsmore, who would be called up, who was a very talented technical wrestler, who'd be called up to be Eric Bischoff's, let's just say, challenged nephew. 5 members of the Spirit Squad, including a very young Dolph Ziggler, John Morrison, The Miz, Shelton Benjamin, and Tyson Tomko. And that's just a list, a cut down list of all the people that went through the doors of OVW and would find their way onto the WWF main roster. The promotion itself was actually even used to get talent like the Big Show and Mark Henry, both of which who were on contract, had worked for the WWF and was on actual full-time, big-time contracts. They were sent down to OVW to get into better shape and sometimes work on their attitudes. I believe that Big Show's issue was a little bit of both. Mark Henry's was mostly his size. He was getting a little out of shape, and they were sent down to OVW to work on things without the pressure of national television. OVW would be really the centerpiece of the WWF developmental system for many years, and I'll touch on, and there's a lot of stuff that happens here in the middle, and then I'll touch on the end of that relationship. After the fall of Power Pro Wrestling, there was also Memphis Championship Wrestling, which would be a developmental between 2000 and 2001. MCW was founded by Terry Golden, based in, of course, Memphis. The deal would only last from, it was based in Memphis, but would only last from February 20th of 2000 to June of 2001, so it's a little over a year. But during this time, their shows would feature talent like Brian Kendrick, Lance Cade, Bryan Danielson, aka Daniel Bryan, Joey Abs, Pete Gas, and Rodney. They were the Mean Street Posse, and they were sent down developmental after the Mean Street Posse gimmick had run its course. The Island Boys of Jamal and Rosie, who would be called up later as 3 Minute Warning, Victoria, and many, many others. Ultimately, the purchase of WCW in 2001 and the influx of new WCW talent led to the WWE completely overhauling their developmental system and cutting quite a few developmental wrestlers to make room for the new WCW talent. After the end of the deal with MCW, they would also partner with the Heartland Wrestling Alliance. The Heartland Wrestling Alliance was founded by Les Thatcher in 1996. HWA would find itself as developmental territory for both the WF and WCW at different times during the promotion's life, and would famously hold the Brian Pillman Memorial shows between the years of 1998 and 2001, with Brian Pillman having that connection to Cincinnati, Ohio, where HWA was based. Between 2001 and 2002, HWA would be a developmental territory working side by side with OVW, and would feature such talents as Mike Sanders, Shannon Moore, Victoria, the Hardy Boys, and Charlie and Russ Haas. What a lot of young fans don't know, if you know Charlie Haas, Russ Haas was tagging with his brother, and his brother unfortunately passed away at a very young age while they were in developmental, but the Haas brothers were the original tag team before he was placed with Shelton Benjamin. The HWA played a unique role in the WWF's acquisition of WCW, as all wrestlers fell into 3 camps. The first was ones that were brought directly onto WWF television, like Booker T, Diamond Dallas Page, Chris Kanyon, Hugh Morris, so on and so forth. The second were the people that were released outright, a lot of young talent some of which had just started with promotions, such as Christopher Daniels and Steve Corino, who had signed with WCW before the company was sold, but he never actually debuted before they were sold. So this is a guy who finished up with ECW, signed with WCW, but never debuted on television because WCW had been sold, which is a very unique situation. And actually, he's done an interview where he detailed what happened between the time he signed and the time the WWF let him go. The third category were those that were sent to the HWA to be evaluated so WWE could determine which talents from WCW they were interested in keeping. Those were the ones that were sort of on the bubble, and there were quite a lot of them. The promotion was a mixture of WCW talent, homegrown HWA talent like BJ Whitmer, Cody Hawk, Shark Boy, a young John Moxley, and as well as WWF main roster members who made appearances in HWA or to knock off some proverbial ring rust. And at one point, Raven would become the booker of HWA with the assistance of Mike Sanders. Yes, above average Mike Sanders. Then later, Brian Adams, of all people, would book the promotion, which is just a weird thing to say. HWA was based in Cincinnati, Ohio. OVW's base was in Louisville, Kentucky, which is about roughly 90 minutes away from each other, which made it easier for them to ship talent between the two promotions. And it was close enough to where both promotions would film their television at the Davis Arena in Louisville. So that was very convenient, where both promotions, although separate, could actually film TV in the same arena, and that would save them both time and money. WWE would eventually release a lot of the WCW talents. They had an HWA and would end their developmental deal with HWA in 2002, making for a while, for about 3 years, OVW was the sole developmental territory for the WWF. In 2005, the WWF tried something a little different. They were trying to make some inroads in the South, in Georgia, and they decided to, in addition to OVW, like I said, OVW was the sole promotion for about 3 years, and then in 2005, that despite having no active school or promotion running at the time, Masked Assassin and former power plant head Jody Hamilton, there's that name again, was chosen to be the newest developmental territory, and he opened Deep South Wrestling in 2005. This was something that was built from scratch because reportedly WWE sent talent to train at Deep South before the building was even brought up to code, which means trainees couldn't actually train in the ring or perform in front of fans, the things they were being paid to do. Deep South would eventually hold its first show on September 1st, 2005, and a few months later, crown Mike Mizanin, The Miz, as the first Deep South heavyweight champion. They would crown tag team champions, and for the most part run as their own promotion, while the promotion would feature developmental talent like Jay Bradley, the future Xavier Woods, and even a very young Kenny Omega. The promotion wouldn't catch on like WWE had hoped, and the WWE in its relationship on April 18th, 2007, less than 2 years after its inception. Now, this was reportedly after a WWE representative visited the Deep South facility and was appalled at their operation, and once they reported back, they decided to cut ties. During the very short tenure, Deep South would see some controversy for employing Bill DeMott as both head trainer and booker, and what would be only his first criticism of his training style, which even led to a young Kenny Omega to request his release from a developmental contract. They also had a controversy in late 2006 where they had signed Claudio Castagnoli, who is now known as Cesaro, to a developmental deal. Castagnoli finished up his independent dates, finished up with Ring of Honor. They made a big deal about him leaving and going to be in developmental and in the WWE system. And he was supposed to report to Deep South, but it was released before he even debuted there. Deep South and the WWE tried to claim it was some kind of visa issue, but they had no answer when Castagnoli brought up that he'd been working legally in the United States under a proper visa since 2004. So that doesn't look good. Deep South would close the promotion as soon as the WWE went away because, quite frankly, the only reason they existed was for the WWE deal. This wasn't a long, OVW had existed for years before they got the deal. Deep South existed as soon as they got this contract, so as soon as it was taken away, they had nothing to stand on. All WWE talent would then be sent to Ohio Valley Wrestling, which makes total sense. Now, this is around 2007. The WWE this time decided to change their methodology, and they were looking to move their developmental program away from places like Cincinnati and Louisville and into Florida, where they figured it'd be easier to get talent, people that are, like the WCW method, guys that are in Atlanta who'd washed out from the Falcons or the Braves. Well, they're in Atlanta. It's a big city in the South. They're gonna live in the area, but they're also gonna be there because they're there for different reasons. Anyway, the WWF decided they were gonna move things to Florida, which would see the creation of Florida Championship Wrestling under the ownership of Steve Kern. Yes, Steve Kern, Skinner, you know the one. As soon as they established Florida Championship Wrestling, the WWE announced that they were ending their partnership with OVW, and subsequently moved all their contracted developmental wrestlers from OVW to Florida Championship Wrestling. Florida Championship Wrestling would be the developmental territory for the WWE from 2007 to 2012. With the mercy killing of Deep South, many pointed to Booker T's Houston-based Pro Wrestling Alliance as a good bet for the next developmental territory. It was already up and running. It was already producing talent. It had a lot, the talent had a lot of potential, and it was actively being run by a former world champion. The WWE, however, decided to give the contract to Steve Kern and Florida Championship Wrestling, a promotion that didn't even exist. Yeah, this was another promotion where, like Deep South, was built from scratch. As soon as they got the contract, then they built a promotion from scratch and ran into some of the same problems. Now, some point to Kieran being based in Tampa, which they wanted to move to Florida anyway, as a good reason for the contract. Others say his relationship with then head of talent relations John Laurinaitis didn't hurt. But either way, Florida Championship Wrestling was born and given a WWE developmental deal virtually on the same day. This was another promotion that was built from scratch. The WWE Network did a documentary on FCW, and they sort of talked about this a little bit. It was built from scratch. The original building couldn't run shows at first because it wasn't up to building codes. And then I remember, I could not source this for the life of me, but I do remember hearing in stories originally that the main issue about the building was they didn't have bathrooms, meaning that trainees had to use the gas station across the street. Yes, I'm serious. Regardless of its less than desirable beginnings, FCW would grow to be one of the WWE's most successful developmental territories, producing main roster talent such as Dean Ambrose, Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, Jake Hager, AJ Lee, Brodus Clay, Big E Langston, back when he still had a last name, all of the original Nexus, including Daniel Bryan, Heath Slater, Jimmy and Jey Uso, Paige, Ryback, and so many more. I mean, it's hard to, you talk about OVW being at one point producing so many great talents. You'd say the same thing about Florida Championship Wrestling. There was a lot of people that came from that promotion who became main roster people, and not only main roster stars. This wasn't guys that came in and did job work. These were guys these were men and women who became, many of which are top stars, and some people you're seeing the payoff now, but they're top guys now, but they got their start in Florida Championship Wrestling. Like others before it, Florida Championship Wrestling was created solely to be a WWE developmental, and would cease operating in August of 2012 in favor of NXT. NXT, the TV show, started off as a reality show, replacing the merciful old Yeller-esque murder of the WWE ECW brand. The show would be part wrestling, part stupid games, and they'd play, the kind of stuff you'd see Diva Search contestants play, until it became way too much and they just canceled the show entirely. Now, after that happened, after I believe that was 4 seasons, there was a 5th season planned, and then they came to their senses, I guess. NXT, the promotion, NXT would have transitioned to a full-fledged promotion in 2012, and would open a state-of-the-art performance center in Orlando, Florida, with weekly television tapings from Full Sail University in Winter Park. This version of NXT would be a pet project of Triple H, who saw the biggest problem with the WWE was finding and producing new talent. As the episodes covered, the WWE developmental system to this point was WWE working with existing promotions, for better or worse, with varying degrees of success. Sometimes you ended up with an OVW or Florida Championship Wrestling, sometimes you ended up in Deep South. This way, as Triple H saw it, you could control the developmental process literally from day one, with trials, physical training, in-ring workouts, promo classes, character development, and live performances all done in-house, which streamlined the WWE developmental system like never before. OVW was an attempt at this, but it was still, the WWE was paying another promotion to run what they were going to do anyway, and they were feeding their guys in. This was the WWE saying, we're going to create this promotion from scratch, and we're going to do everything from bringing them in, trying them out, getting them ring work, working them on house shows, and then putting them on TV, all within the same WWE developmental system, which was revolutionary. And this is something that, keep in mind, WWE had not figured this out until 2012, which, if you think about how long the WWE's been around, That's mind-boggling. Now, however, not everything's rosy here. This has drawn criticism from some who say that all the new talent going through the NXT system the same way, you're more likely to end up with this seemingly endless conveyor belt of similar sounding and looking talent. I mean, who could forget the early 2000s where seemingly everyone who came from Developmental was a short-haired musclehead with loads of tattoos. Then again, on the other end of that, NXT has so far produced everyone from Otis to Finn Balor to Sasha Banks. So maybe this criticism is a little unwarranted, but it's still out there. Triple H continues to take a fatherly role in NXT, being seen as the mastermind of the entire brand, something Vince McMahon reportedly leaves alone, which for someone who has that much control over every single thing, including his own sneezes, that's saying something. Triple H would even take what many consider to be corporate demotion to further devote his time to building the NXT brand so he can have less board meetings at Titan Towers and more time in Florida working with young talent. But now they're about to run into a problem as NXT finds its footing on USA and becomes a true third brand under the WWE umbrella. The question for some is, when does it stop being a developmental territory and just become another WWE property? Daniel Bryan's already said this. He said that NXT is just that. It's another WWE brand, meaning that according to him, WWE is once again without a developmental program. Now that's not official, but it's his opinion. So it's not official, but it's still an argument to make. When does that line, no one can ever argue that OVW was a full-fledged WWE brand, HWA, even Florida Championship Wrestling. These were never another brand of the WWE, but now with the network, because, NXT started on the promotion started on the WWE network, now they're on the USA network, so there's more intent on keeping the TV show to certain ratings to satisfy advertisers, which puts it in the league of SmackDown and Raw, instead of just being something they put on the network to establish new talent. So that's the debate right now, is how long, and really it's not that they're not the developmental brand. The question is, if they keep going this direction on TV with the USA Network, how long before they're not really the developmental brand and then they're a third brand? So that's really the question you have to be asking. Now the WWE seems to be ahead of the curve at times, and in this case, many thought maybe they were when they purchased Evolve from Gabe Sapolsky, which was a brand known for, again, producing great talent, but was even then still less known than NXT. However, shortly after showing Evolve's 10th anniversary show on the WWE Network, the first independent show to appear on the WWE Network, WWE would announce that they had bought Evolve outright. The names, all the trademarks and the video library. So again, theoretically, there's another promotion, but really what they bought it for was more content for the network. Gabe Sapolsky would sign on as a consultant for the WWE, but Evolve effectively is out of business. So even if you thought, okay, well then if NXT becomes the third brand and they buy Evolve could be the new developmental, well, they sort of shot themselves in the foot there. I'm not saying that's what would have happened, but I'm saying is the way they've treated it is basically, it's like when they bought the AWA library, or the ECW library, or the Memphis library, or, name a library. I mean, go on the network right now. Not right now. Finish the episode, please. But go on the network and click all these other promotions. It was just buying guys like Drew Gulak, and it used to be Biff Busick, but Oni Lorcan, or Tommaso Ciampa, or Johnny Gargano. I mean, a lot of NXT guys who are now in NXT, they've had some time in Evolve. So you're getting footage, which is, again, from a business standpoint, that's a good idea. But then, they're not running the promotion. You're buying it because the library works to your advantage. So if you want to do a DVD set later on about Tommaso Ciampa, you have a lot of Evolve footage. Okay, great. So that's where we're at right now. As we know, I mean, NXT, and this is not a criticism. I don't want to come at the end like this is some kind of criticism of NXT. I think NXT is probably one of the best things WWE's done in years, not only for in-ring work, but also for, again, streamlining a process that had sort of been varied out the years. Everything from OVW to Deep South, from UPW to Florida Championship Wrestling, these sort of alliances with other promotions and sort of being at their whim and who had control and how much and so on and so forth. And then if you turn around with NXT, you now had a promotion that was, everything was in-house. Everything from the producers to the road agents to the guys producing the entrance themes to the trainers to everything had become in-house. and it produced a really great product. And I like NXT, so I don't want to seem like this is a criticism, but this is where the WWF developmental system, the WWE developmental system, man, I've gone back and forth on those this whole time, haven't I? But in the WWE developmental system, this is where it's led to, and I think this is the best possible outcome of the entire system, and it's a credit to a guy like Triple H. Again, someone who, I'm talking about it sitting in my house in Ohio, never met the guy, but I mean, if you look at what he's done, you have to give him credit. You can think whatever you want about his in-ring work, you can talk about the Reign of Terror, you can think about all these things he's done in his wrestling career, whether you liked it or not, but as a performance, as something like NXT, the Performance Center, and all these things, you have to give him credit for at least thinking progressively, thinking forward on how the developmental system would be improved and streamlined and would end up where it is today. I hope you like this episode. I mean, it's a little, again, I like to take a topic and I sort of go deep on it, and I like to do stuff like that. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you like this look into the developmental system. The developmental system is not the flashiest. I mean, it's not. I mean, a lot of guys who are working, John Cena has main evented how many WrestleManias, but he's also worked in the Davis Arena, and he worked in flea markets, and he worked, all these shows in Kentucky and Ohio and all these things. The developmental system is not the flashiest part of pro wrestling, but it's a very vital system. It's a very vital part of it, because everyone who's at a certain point, for the most part, for all these guys that are at WrestleMania, they started in little crappy little promotions and little shows, and then they got to developmental, which was slightly better, and then they end up on the WWE main roster. So developmental is very important. It's an aspect of wrestling, and that's why I wanted to cover it. So yeah, that's gonna be it for this episode. Please continue to support ZTO. I'm part of a group called Drift Compatible. We are doing some really cool stuff. We're working on some projects, long-term projects right now. Again, I keep teasing it, but when I have it in my hand, I will tell you about it, and heck, I will shill it on here. Check out Hillbilly Therapy with Jay Kill. I co-host that. It's different from Exploder. It's not wrestling based at all, and I don't talk, and I want to say articulate, but that's not what I'm going for. I don't talk as long-winded. I sort of answer questions and I go on to the next thing. The episodes are shorter. They don't go as long as these do, but check them out. Something About Sports, that is Jake Eilerman. He does that by himself. It's about sports. If you like sports, it's a good podcast. He has a passion about sports like I do about wrestling, so it's something to really check out. I mean, there's so many things on ZTO. Check it out. I can't even begin to tell you how Murder Fluent, the Last Roundup Horror Show, man, I mean, I'm literally having trouble thinking about all. There's so many great podcasts, Schlockfest, and all these different. Check them out, ZTO Network. Check out everything. And that's going to be it for this one. I'm going to try to be more consistent from here on out. I can't make any promises, but I don't know, in 2 weeks from now, I hope there's another episode out. I hope to record another episode and get it to you. So until next time, my name's Dan, this Exploder. Have a good one.